The U.S. economy is no longer hanging off the edge of a fiscal cliff. In a down-to-the-wire emergency meeting, the Senate approved a deal to avoid tax hikes and spending cuts set to take effect today. At 2 a.m. this morning, senators were still in a rare New Year's session. They voted 89-8 to raise some taxes on the wealthy and made no changes to the tax rates on the middle class that have been in place for the last decade. But the deal doesn't do much to rein in government spending, which has pushed the U.S. debt level to $16.4 trillion. However, Senator Harry Reid says the legislation does what it was designed to do.
Working through the night and throughout the day, we've reached an agreement with Senator McConnell to avert tax increases on middle-class Americans. I've said all along that our most important priority was to protect middle-class families. This legislation does that.
For more now, let's go to our Washington Bureau Chief, Bryn Weese. He is live for us in D.C. this morning. So, Bryn, let's break down the Senate deal. What exactly does it include?
Well, it was interesting, Sneha, to watch, of course, the dealing back and forth. But ultimately, what senators decided to do by an overwhelming vote of 89-8 is raise the tax rates on American individuals who make $400,000 a year or more, and raise the rate on couples who file jointly and make between them $450,000 a year. This is higher, about $200,000 higher than the threshold that Democrats had initially wanted, but that's what happens, of course, in negotiations. It also hikes the estate tax. This is the so-called death tax, the tax on inheritance. Over $5 million, the tax rate on inheritance goes from 35% to 40%. That's something else Democrats wanted to see in this deal. And it extends the unemployment benefits for another year. This is something, again, that Democrats wanted to see in this deal. What it also does, Sneha, it puts off, as you mentioned, for 2 months, the deep spending cuts that were coming into effect today as part of this sequestration. It puts those off, including all of those defense cuts, for 2 months, and will wrap those spending cuts into the larger debt ceiling debate that we know is coming down the pipe. So it's a deal that effectively puts off the worst impacts of the fiscal cliff. As you know, markets are closed today, so it does give the House of Representatives some time to act today. Now, the House will be convening today at noon for an emergency session. It could be they could be voting on this bill as early as 1 p.m. We do know that John Boehner stopped short of endorsing this plan, saying it would be up to the individual members to decide what to do once they've seen the details of this plan. But Mitch McConnell, who's the top Republican in the Senate and really the leading Republican in these round of negotiations with Vice President Joe Biden, said last night, Sneha, that although this only deals with the tax issues and puts off looming more tax fights, he knows that he's confident that proper spending cuts will be made in the next round of fights in a couple months. Let's listen to Mitch McConnell last night.
As I said, this shouldn't be the model for how we do things around here, but I think we can say we've done some good for the country. We've done some good for the country. We've taken care of the revenue side of this debate. And now it's time to get serious about reducing Washington's out-of-control spending. That's a debate the American people want. It's the debate we'll have next, and it's a debate Republicans are ready for.
And Sneha, as I mentioned earlier, the Senate passed this measure 89-8. Some notables who voted against it are Senator Marco Rubio and Rand Paul, both considered to be perhaps runners in the 2016 presidential race. And also some Democrats voted against it too, generally the extreme far left of the Democratic Party. And the same kind of opposition could be seen in the House later today. We've already heard from some right-wing members of the House of Representatives who say they'll vote against it. There could also be some members from the left who don't like this plan and vote against it. So we'll see at about 1 p.m. today or slightly later whether the House of Representatives passes this measure as well. And then it's up to President Obama to sign it into law to officially avert the fiscal cliff, even though we have now taken the plunge and Washington, D.C. is still here, as you can see behind me.
All right, so we went over the cliff, but the world is still here. It's nothing like the Mayan calendar predicted, Bryn. But as you mentioned, a lot of Republicans, there have been rumblings, of course, that spending issue has not been addressed. So what kind of fight can we expect in Congress this afternoon?
Well, it's going to be you can imagine it's going to be a tough fight, because there are Republicans are already openly saying they're not going to vote against this bill because it really does nothing on the spending side. And for Republicans, they view the majority of this fiscal problem in Washington is coming from spending too much money. It's not a revenue problem for many of these Republicans. It's a spending problem. And this deal, as you just heard from Mitch McConnell there, does nothing to address the spending. It simply punts off the deep spending cuts and sets up another showdown, another fiscal cliff, if you will, 2 months from now. So we'll see. Of course, also remember the powerful lobby groups in Washington and elsewhere in the U.S. Do have quite a bit of power. Lobby groups on the left who don't like this deal, and groups on the right, like the Heritage Foundation, who don't like this deal. So we'll see what kind of pressure they're able to exert on the members. We do know, Sneha, and it's interesting to point out, Grover Norquist, the anti-tax pledge powerful lobbyist here in Washington, D.C., he's signed off on this deal. He said that this is not a vote to raise taxes, but effectively it's a vote to lower taxes for the middle class, and it makes them permanent. So Grover Norquist is on board, meaning Republicans and other lawmakers don't have to worry about breaking their word if they had signed that anti-tax pledge never to vote for a tax increase.
All right. Still, though, as you point out, the showdown is not over, and a lot more to watch today. Thank you, Bryn.
Thanks, Neha.
That is our Washington Bureau Chief Bryn Weese joining us live in D.C.